This video was made with the copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. All the third-party footage shown has been muted and voiced over with my commentary as context, and the very few audible clips have a lower volume with darkened opacity to be obscured. The purpose for this video is non-profit and educational for me to share my opinion about its topic.
So my son, speak.
Who am I?
Superman is Clark Kent, and Clark Kent is Superman. One is the true persona, and the other is a performance. Since 1938, the common assumption has been that the true persona comes without glasses, and the performance begins when the glasses are put on. To quote Bill from Kill Bill Volume 2, Superman didn't become Superman. Superman was born Superman. When Superman wakes up in the morning, he's Superman. His alter ego is Clark Kent. His outfit with the big red S, that's the blanket he was wrapped in as a baby when the Kents found him. Those are his clothes. What Kent wears, the glasses, the business suit, that's the costume. That's the costume Superman wears to blend in with us. Clark Kent is how Superman views us. And what are the characteristics of Clark Kent? He is weak. He is unsure of himself. He is a coward. Clark Kent is Superman's critique of the whole human race. Bill's actor David Carradine grew up in the golden age of comic books, and the author of his dialogue, Quentin Tarantino, grew up in between Silver and Bronze Ages, both eras which believe in the truth in Bill's dialogue. It was not until 1986 when that notion was challenged in John Byrne's The Man of Steel miniseries, which sought to balance the tie between Clark Kent and Superman. This change in character status quo was something John Byrne was given to explore, similar to how Frank Miller was given to expand Batman's origin story in Batman Year One, in exploring what he was doing between watching his parents die and first putting on the cape and cowl. Byrne's comic was meant to be the first modern retelling of Superman's origin after Crisis on Infinite Earths rebooted the DC multiverse into just one universe, and with this new history, the DC editorial wanted to make changes. John Byrne wrote these onto the character like this. He was born as Kal-El. He was raised as Clark Kent. And it is us, the human race, who gave him the name Superman. By this logic, Clark Kent is the person, and Superman is the performance. This is the case in most medias released since. Dean Cain's version from Lois and Clark Adventures of Superman TV series, when confronted by Terry Hatcher's Lois Lane of being Superman, rebutted this by saying,
Superman is what I can do. Clark is who I am.
The DC animated universe's Superman, after having been forced to frame Clark Kent's death by an assassin and being told he'd have to be Superman 24/7 from now on, recoiled by saying,
But I am Clark. I need to be Clark. I'd go crazy if I had to be Superman all the time.
And that last bit of dialogue actually supports my view of the Injustice series as well. In the Injustice universe, Superman's devolution into the tyrannical dictator is, from my point of view, best described as the absence of Clark Kent. After the Joker fooled Superman into killing his pregnant wife, which caused a nuke to go off in the heart of Metropolis, killing almost everyone in the city, and led to Superman taking the Joker's life. Following this, Superman became obsessed trying to keep what happened to Metropolis from happening again, and began to be Superman for 24/7, completely abandoning his life as Clark Kent, while pulling a Brian Michael Bendis, and with the Justice League enabling his behavior. Then, in just 5 years, he had devolved into the High Counselor Superman, the shadow of his former self, without the humanity of Clark Kent. Now, after I have made, Gotham High, Blades, those two manga videos, Brave and the Bold, Batfleck Returns, and my last Batwoman video, 7 Batman-related videos, it is high time I made a video talking about Superman. To be clear, The two movies, one made before John Byrne's The Man of Steel comic, and the one made 27 years later with the same name. The one from the era where Superman was Clark Kent, and the one from the era where Clark Kent is Superman.
Excuse me. You've got our attention.
The 1970s, when the original Superman movie came out, was the twilight years of the Silver Age of comics and the dawn of the Bronze Age. And based on the Wikipedia article I read through before writing this part of the script, there was very little influence from the comics when it was made. Quite the contrary, it was the movie that would later go on to influence the comics that came out in the following years. Alternatively, Man of Steel came out in 2013, which was not only a whole different decade, but also a whole different century and millennia. By that point, it was a whole different world that we lived in, and both movies show how the eras they were made are different. The best example of this is showing how the humanity reacted to Superman's first appearance before us. In the 1970s, Superman was widely and positively accepted by us. We saw a man flying around, lifting yachts with multiple people in them, and drilling himself below the ground through concrete, and then we just carried on with our lives. We were awestruck by what we saw, and didn't think twice about it, but when Man of Steel came out in 2013, after the end of Cold War, September 11th, and the War on Terror, our reaction to Superman stepping forward was filled with caution and prejudice. We had changed, and Superman reflected to the welcome we gave him. As the two visionaries bringing Superman to the silver screen, both Richard Donner and Zack Snyder are not very much different when it comes to what they were doing. Donner insisted that the subject of comic book superhero movies should be treated straight, as in portrayed with respect to the fantasy genre's particular convention and tone, rather than camp, an approach that strongly influenced other filmmakers like Snyder decades later. This led to him having a difficult relationship with the executive producers Alexander and Ilya Salkind and the producer Pierre Spengler. The Salkinds refused Donner's demands for Spengler's firing, which led to Donner being fired instead during the filming of Superman 2. Similar to what happened to Zack Snyder during the post-production of Justice League in 2017, and both directors' sequel movies resulting in finished versions by different people. Richard Lester with Superman 2, and Joss Whedon with the Justice League. Richard Donner would eventually get his cut of Superman 2 released to the public in 2006, following the release of Superman Returns, and Zack Snyder's Justice League is bound to be released on HBO Max in 2021. History has a funny way of repeating itself. When it comes to Zack Snyder's direction of Man of Steel in 2013, he elected to take a more science fiction heavy approach with the story, and production influenced by Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer, who wrote the story and screenplay. The first clear difference is seen in the beginning of the movie, with the planet Krypton being more focused on its presentation. Unlike Donner's icy world of crystals and chasms, which was not a very interesting or focused in showing how people were supposed to live there, Snyder's Krypton showcased more culture and technology that made it look like an actual advanced alien world. This might have been due to the technology available at the time and or the budget, but ultimately it is the Man of Steel's Krypton that makes a better impression, that hits home more on the loss when it gets destroyed. All those alien life forms, advanced culture, thousands of years of history showcased in the opening of the movie, you can get a proper grasp of seeing it when it comes to the 1978 Krypton, which is more cold and distant, that you would rather just get out of there as quickly as possible.
Who are you?
A friend.
I can do things that other people can't. Hold my hand.
Between the two performers bringing the character alive, Christopher Reeve has been cemented as a template of what Superman should look and act like since his on-screen debut. This has been most noticeable on the works written by Richard Donner's disciple Jeff Johns, who after taking over Action Comics in 2006 made the artist working with him, especially Gary Frank, to draw Superman to look as Christopher Reeve as possible. As the actor portraying the character, Christopher Reeve was actually the second actor to portray Clark Kent in the movie. He does not even show up until nearly halfway as an adult, while the previous scenes with the character are portrayed by Jeff East as a teenager, although Reeve was used to dub over East's dialogue in the final movie.
Don't bother with these, huh? I'll take them in with the other equipment.
Believe me, that boy was not happy about it. Reeve's first scene in the movie, his first actual scene where he, acts, is at the Daily Planet trying to get his job as Clark Kent. After getting it from Jackie Cooper's Perry White, he spends some time at his work before leaving with Margot Kidder's Lois, and then they have an encounter with the gunman where Clark pretends to faint after taking a bullet for Lois in secret. We get to see the famous helicopter sequence where Lois gets into trouble where traditional rescue missions are impossible, thus forcing Clark to find a place to change into his Superman costume and reveal himself to the world. After leaving awestruck Lois safely on the roof, Superman is shown doing a montage of catching a burglar, criminals on a speedboat, saving a cat out of a tree, and Air Force One from an engine failure. In the aftermath of this, only the press are interested in who Superman is and where he came from, and none of the United States Armed Forces or the SCP Foundation. While Perry White demands to his staff to find Superman and interview him, Clark slips a note to Lois to have her waiting for him at her apartment later that night for him to give her the interview as Superman. After this interview is over, the famous, infamous take your pick which one flight around Metropolis, Superman leaves Lois' apartment and returns almost as quickly as Clark. And this is the point in which we see who the true persona is. Clark's dialogue reveals that he and Lois had apparently made late night lunch plans, and while Lois needs to go freshen up after her night with Superman, Clark privately removes his glasses and tries to rehearse a conversation with Lois about telling he is Superman. This removal of his glasses, along with the change in voice and personality, is what paints the impression that Superman is the one Reeve is portraying as the main character, and Clark Kent is the disguise, just as Bill said it would be. This separation between Clark and Superman is also quite obvious with the two actors from Jeff East to Christopher Reeve. In the movie, this is because East's Clark is portrayed as an 18-year-old and Reeve was, at the time of filming 26, supposed to be a 30-year-old. This time skip was explained in the movie by having East's Clark, after building the Fortress of Solitude and finding Marlon Brando's Jor-El, his father's AI in consciousness, spent 12 years inside the fortress educating himself about his powers and the reason why he was sent to Earth, along with undisclosed knowledge about the known universe according to Kryptonian scientists. That's 12 years he stays in the fortress up there on the North Pole without any implications that he left to see what was happening in the world in the meantime. Just staying in there to have otherworldly knowledge pumped into him like it was installed into Bender in Futurama. And this is something the movie just glosses over without exploring any further in the movie or its sequels. Well, this is likely due to Richard Donner's firing, but from my point of view, those 12 years of educating Clark could be implied that the transitioning from Jeff East to Christopher Reeve, Clark Kent, who had been growing up on Earth as a human being, with his powers developing, was re educated in the way where, in learning who he was and what he was, Clark reduced his humanity to a disguise he could wear to walk among us and stand before the humanity as a human looking alien with powers that no one would complain about. That is what I see in this scene. This, where Clark removes his glasses, this is where we see Christopher Reeve as Superman taking off the mask of his disguise, revealing himself to be an alien pretending to be a human. No wonder there are so many evil parody versions of Superman out there. Then there is Henry Cavill, who is a spitting image of the comic book character as drawn by many modern artists from John Byrne to Dan Jurgens. And he really committed himself to the role. Damn, I wish I was that ripped. Just like in the 1978 movie, Cavill shared the role of the younger Clark Kent with Cooper Timberlane and Dylan Sprayberry, who played the character at ages of 9 and 13, with Cavill taking over from them when Clark is supposed to be 17. Compared to Jeff East being switched by Christopher Reeve, the fact that we see Henry Cavill as Clark Kent before putting on the Kryptonian ceremony garb that we call Superman suit, it is easier to see that the character follows John Byrne's status quo, which we can see happening in Man of Steel. He is born in the beginning of the movie as Kal-El. He is shown being raised by Jonathan and Martha Kent as Clark Kent, and it is later in the movie when we see the humanity who gave him the name Superman.
Superman?
The alien, sir. That's what they're calling him, Superman.
Humanity being represented by the United States Defense Forces. Henry Cavill's character is so more written and portrayed to be Clark Kent more than Superman. And that is something that really caught many non-comic book reading audience members and reviewers off guard. They must have been understandably expecting to see a Superman movie about Superman instead of a Superman movie about Clark Kent. But this fact was telegraphed from the title of the movie, Man of Steel. It was a movie about Superman rather than Superman. And none of these comparisons are meant to make either version look better or worse. Yes, Christopher Reeve is still the most iconic Superman actor because that is all he played. He played Superman who used Clark Kent as a disguise. That was the status quo in the comics for the character at the time, and it was then changed 8 years later by John Byrne's The Man of Steel comic. And in that instance, Henry Cavill was supposed to be playing Clark Kent, who, as time went on and more movies would come out, was supposed to grow into the role of Superman, the same way as the mainstream version grew up into the role between 1985 and 2011. And in order to talk more about their differences, I need to focus on the other characters in both movies.
You will travel far, my little Kal-El, but we will never leave you, even in the face of our death.
Son, our hopes and dreams travel with you.
Jor-El, as portrayed by Marlon Brando, was used as much as a template for comics to come like his on-screen son was. It was allegedly Marlon Brando's idea to have Superman's S-shield to be established as the House of El crest, and that the Kryptonian society would have individual crests for different families. Brando's screen time establishes his role in the Kryptonian High Council to expand also to juridical duties as judge and prosecutor in the trial of General Druzad, Ursa, and Non. More about them later. Then, in his final moments, Brando's Jor-El acts cold and calculative as if resigned to his fate with Krypton's destruction and knowing that he can send his son to safety. Surprisingly calm, as Krypton then starts its destruction mere minutes after Kal-El's ship has left the planet. Russell Crowe's Jor-El, on the other hand, lived on a Krypton that was reaching the end of its life cycle due to the lack of resources, that according to his knowledge had driven the Council of Krypton to start harvesting the planet's core, which was the cause leading towards its destruction. He also lived in a society where population growth was controlled with artificial births that led to predetermined fates for every child born in this society. Crowe's Jor-El rebelled against this by having his son through a natural birth with his wife Lara, and saw his newborn as new hope for their devolved society's survival. and in the final moments of his life took every precaution to ensure his newborn son would escape Krypton's destruction and that his people would also survive in him. Unlike Brando's version, Crow went down fighting against Michael Shannon's General Zod to make sure his son got off the planet. In postmortem, both Jor-Els are represented by an artificial intelligence, with Brando's version presented more as a pre-recorded answering machine, with any number of possible answers to different questions that his son could have asked. In contrast, Crow's AI Jor-El is less robotic and more advanced as an artificial intelligence pretending to be a person. Zack Snyder actually revealed in his live watch-along of Man of Steel streamed on Vero that he saw the Jor-El AI as a sentient letter capable of interacting with the reader, but not as a complete person. It didn't replace the person who died, but it was close enough. And unlike Marlon Brando's Jor-El, he allowed Clark to go back home instead of keeping him hostage for 12 years. Again, like with the Superman actors, neither Jor-El's actor is better or worse than the other, but going from Marlon Brando to Russell Crowe, there were aspects in the first one that were expanded by the next one. David Goyer actually took some of these aspects even further when he created the concept for the Krypton television series on Sci-Fi, but that is a subject for a different video.
First thing we got to do when we get home is find out who that boy's proper family is.
He hasn't got any. Not around here anyway.
Can I just keep pretending I'm your son?
You are my son.
Jonathan and Martha Kent, as played by Glenn Ford and Phyllis Taxler, served very little purpose outside of finding baby Kal-El from his ship when it landed, giving him the name Clark Kent, and deciding to raise him. After the previously mentioned event, they are shown with Jeff East's incarnation as he comes home from school one day. Jonathan Kent has some nice words with Clark about not showing off his powers to his schoolmates thinking less about him, and then he dies of a heart attack when Clark dares him to run back to their house. Martha Kent screams in horror seeing her husband die, and then is shown in her final scene at his funeral. I don't want to underplay their influences in raising Clark, but considering how they make no appearance or get barely any mention later, the movie tends to do that for me. Especially when Christopher Reeve seemed to be portrayed as Superman who used Clark Kent as a disguise.
Sends a check every week to his sweet gray-haired old mother.
Actually, she's silver-haired.
Bare mention of sending some of his reporter's salary to his widowed mother seems to be more done out of obligation and repayment of taking care of him before Jor-El's hologram re-educated him. With Diane Lane and Kevin Costner's versions in Man of Steel, Jonathan and Martha Kent have been given a much larger role in showing how they raised Clark and dealt with how his powers started to manifest. Man of Steel skips the part where the Kents stumble across Kal-El's arrival and jumps right into Cooper Timberlane's 9-year-old Clark as his super hearing and X-ray vision first start to develop while he is at school. Confused over what is happening to him, Clark runs to hide in the supply closet until Martha Kent is called to help and support Clark controlling his sensory abilities. Jonathan Kent is shown next a few years later when Clark has grown up to be portrayed by Dylan Sprayberry. Following the incident where the school bus Clark had been on got a flat tire, drove off a bridge to a river, and he used his powers to push the bus to shore, Jonathan and Martha Kent are left to deal with what Clark's classmates told to their parents. In what many have come to see as a controversial scene, Jonathan comes to tell Clark that keeping his powers a secret is an important priority, similar to how Glenn Ford's Jonathan did in the 1978 movie, but here it is different. Because the scene is set in 1993, in the aftermath of the Cold War and the Red Scare, the humanity is not as open and accepting as they were back in the 60s, where Jeff East's Clark grew up. That is why Kevin Costner's Jonathan tells Clark that they need to keep the side of him that has powers as a secret. Some audience members have come to see this as Jonathan telling Clark that he should have left his schoolmates to drown, but he never actually says that.
What was I supposed to do? Just let him die?
Maybe.
When young Clark asks about this, Jonathan says, maybe, after thinking about it for a few seconds, and then takes another few seconds before changing the subject into how the world is going to react to Clark's powers with fear. Pete Bross's mother, who had come to their house, had tried to justify her son's survival to an act of God, but not everyone outside of the rural Kansas would have the same reaction. Also, after 7 years since Man of Steel came out, I have come to realize that what Pa Kent could have answered should have been, no, you shouldn't have left them to die, but you would have needed to find a way to save them without anyone seeing what you can do. There is also the thing that none of the characters in both movies are supposed to have clairvoyance in knowing what is going to happen in the future, only guesses and presumptions. This is why in Man of Steel, David Goyer took it up to write the young Clark into not knowing that he is going to be Superman in the future, only knowing that he can do all kinds of things that he could not understand, and he was afraid of this. Meanwhile, in the 1978 Superman movie, Jeff East's Clark is shown already in control of his powers, without any sign of him losing control or struggling to have learned how to use them. This is why I prefer Diane Lane and Kevin Costner's version of Jonathan and Martha Kent over Phyllis Traxler and Glenn Ford, as they were actively shown helping Clark learn how to control his powers, and eventually learn how to be confident in using them when he grows up. Also, I get manly tears every time watching this scene where Jonathan shows Clark the ship he came to Earth on, and learns that he is an alien.
Can I just keep pretending I'm your son?
You are my son.
By the time Clark has grown up to be 17 and be portrayed by Henry Cavill, Jonathan and Martha Kent are struggling to raise the young man in his late teenage years, and who seems to act like Jeff East Clark did prior to his father's death. The tornado scene is another scene seen as controversial with how Costner's Jonathan Kent dies in refusal to be saved. A lot of people have understandably questioned why Clark wouldn't run and get his father out of the way of the tornado, but those same people have also seemingly ignored the maybe dozen or so possible witnesses seeing Clark use his powers. Adult witnesses, watching as a 17-year-old teenager ran back and forth to the danger zone faster than a speeding bullet. It was one thing when it was a bus full of his schoolmates when Clark was 13, and the only witnesses were children. But adults' word carries more weight than children, unfortunately. And if Clark had gone to use his powers to save his father, then he would have exposed himself to enough people to talk about what they had seen. There wouldn't have been Superman in the future. Best case scenario, he would have been treated like a cancelled celebrity in the current year who said something offensive, and the worst case scenario is that some shadowy agency would have come and tried to secure him under the containment to protect us from the alien threat he could present. As an Euclid or Keter class entity held by the SCP Foundation, while everyone in Smallville, the Kents included, would have been given amnestics to forget Clark ever existed. Okay, that last bit might have been a stretch, but it's basically the same thing what was done to Superman in the Flashpoint timeline. And that fate was exactly what Kevin Costner's Jonathan Kent was trying to protect his son from enduring. Also, after I have had many comment section arguments debating about this scene, I took another look at it and managed to deduce what Jonathan Kent's plan was in it. First, he would give Clark this young girl he had saved from being left behind and tell Clark to take this girl with his mother to the overpass. Then, as Jonathan runs back to their car to get Hank the dog left behind, it is shown that he would have an ample of time to get back to safety with Hank if it wasn't for this car dropped on his car by the tornado. This setback traps Jonathan into his car for precious seconds he could have used to get back to Clark, Martha, and the other motorists who were forced to leave their cars behind. By the time he manages to get out, Jonathan has his ankle twisted and he is unable to run or even walk to safety. If it wasn't for this damn car, then Jonathan would have lived without Clark even realizing that his father was in a deadly situation. Diane Lane's Martha Kent also has her role continue after her husband's death when Clark comes back after finding the Kryptonian scout ship from the Arctic and learning about his background from Jor-El's AI. And having a home for Clark to come back to further supports my main focus differentiating the Donner film and the Snyder film, the separation between Clark Kent and Superman. Having one of Clark's Earth parents who raised him present in his life helps solidify which side of the character is the persona, and that is why I generally like to see Man of Steel as a movie about Clark Kent wearing the Superman costume.
Bow down before me, both you, and then one day, your ass will find him!
Terrence Stamp's version of General Zod is somewhat difficult to properly pin down as he only appears in the beginning of the 1978 movie and only makes his comeback in the sequel. His crimes for being tried for treason and being sentenced to the Phantom Zone are not explored much either. Due to his limited role in the first movie, it is hard to do any proper comparative analysis on Stamp's Zod with Michael Shannon's without going any further into the sequel. So I'll go over Shannon's version first and then pick up key differences and similarities afterwards. This is also why I won't be doing any comparisons between Gene Hackman and Jesse Eisenberg until I find the time to review Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition. Michael Shannon's Drew Zod is presented more as a man with a purpose. As his generation of Kryptonians were bred for the role they would take in adulthood, he is shown acting more as a military leader with a clear goal that he works towards in order to protect his people. Just as Russell Crowe's Jor-El at the beginning of the movie, his role in the beginning of it is to react to the upcoming destruction of his planet, but unlike how Jor-El focuses on ensuring the safety of the future generations, Zod's main priority is to make sure that the still alive Kryptonians survive. The ones he sees worthy, that is, and in order to cleanse the unworthy, he stages a coup to take over the leadership of the Kryptonian Council, which is what leads to his banishment to the Phantom Zone. The Phantom Zone he is banished into is different from the Donner film by being more science fiction based than the fantasy like Mirror Trap. The best I can explain it on layman's terms is that it is still a pocket universe in where occupying oneself is a fate worse than death, without SCP-106 being there to torment you. In the Donner film, being sent there is done as you would have in a fantasy movie by waving a crystal staff like a magic wand and summoning a giant mirror, while Snyder and Goyer reinvented something that needed more work and effort through technical method with dimensional energy that reminds me from Bioshock Infinite in how the city of Columbia floated in the sky, as well as those fast travel space portals from Mass Effect. Anyway, one of those space portals gets destroyed when Krypton gets destroyed, and that leaves Shannon's Zod with his conspirators stranded in space for 33 years. During those 33 years, Zod and his people traveled all around the space sector 2813 until their ship, Black Zero, picked up the signal coming from space sector 2814 on the Kryptonian scout ship on Earth. Green Lantern fans know what I'm talking about. Arriving on Earth and knowing that the only living Kryptonian left would be Jor-El's son, Zod addresses the humanity by letting them know Kal-El is living among them and requests him to surrender into his custody or else. Once Kal-El, or Clark as I see him, is turned into Zod's custody, Zod reveals that his plans are to terraform Earth into Krypton with the Black Zero, which can divide into two world engines, so the people he has sworn to protect would live on. Compared to Michael Shannon's Zod, I find it difficult to see Terence Stamp's Zod as a military leader and found his performance more resembling a barbaric conqueror. A civilized conqueror like Khatum Khan from Ghost of Tsushima, and that is what separates Stamp's Zod from Shannon's Zod. Stamp's Zod is more one-dimensional by being portrayed as an old-school cinema villain who twirls his mustache/goatee. Both Zods do share some similarities in how they end up escaping the Phantom Zone and coming to Earth. Both Supermen play a part in it, with Reeve throwing a bomb into space and destroying the mirror trap holding Stamp Zod, and Cavill accidentally activates the beacon that leads Zod people on Black Zero to Earth. The diverging point comes in when they arrive on Earth, with Stamp Zod with his posse just getting their powers under the yellow sun without any sensory overload, and basically fucking around everything they come across, including the United States Armed Forces, who are so neutered compared to what we see in Man of Steel that the President of the United States has to beg Superman to come save them, showing Zod that humans are weak victims who need someone else to save them from bullies. Shannon Zod, on the other hand, had come prepared to the environmental changes affecting them on Earth from the sensory overload, and he actually has a plan what to do with Earth with the responsibilities he has. There is also an objective link between the two Zods with the comic book story written by John Byrne titled The Price. This story saw Superman traveling into a pocket universe with Krypton and Earth being the only planets that exist, and with the pocket universe's Zod having conquered Earth, killing most of the humans and Kryptonians like Superboy and Supergirl resisting his rule. I see this as some kind of what-if scenario what Stamp Zod would have eventually done to Earth, and the main universe Superman first stops them by taking away Zod's and his possessed powers with gold kryptonite. However, Zod and his posse brag about being able to get their powers back eventually and coming to conquer Superman's universe. In his response, Superman exposes Zod and his posse to green kryptonite. Acting as judge, jury, and executioner, Superman kills them with radiation not affecting him as a slow, torturous execution. Remember this because I will be coming back to it later. Before moving on to other characters, I should also address Zod's posse in both movies. For the Donner film, it was a literal posse of two people created for the film. Ursa, played by Sarah Douglas, is described by prosecutor Jor-El to have
Persians an unreasoning hatred of all mankind have threatened even the children of the planet Krypton.
And Non, played by Jack O'Halloran,
this mindless aberration, whose only means of expression are wanton violence and destruction.
Both of these characters were created for the movie and did not make any comic book appearance until Jeff Johns' Action Comics run in 2006, which he co-wrote with Richard Donner. In Man of Steel, Michael Shannon's Zod had what can properly be described as a military unit of soldiers, or a platoon, which has characters taken from the comics, like Feo Raul, played by Angie Traue, and on whom Ursa was based on, and Jack Sur, a Kryptonian scientist played by Mackenzie Gray. None is represented with a more Kryptonian name, Nam-Ek. Also, in Ursa's and Faura's case, this knowledge of how to differentiate the original character created for the movie and a character based on comics is one reason why I don't have respect for Linkara anymore after he pretend cried through his Man of Steel review crying why Ursa wasn't called Ursa.
Lois Lane, say hello to Clark Kent.
I'm from the Daily Planet, and I'd like to talk to you about your son.
Lois Lane, as portrayed by Margot Kidder, and Amy Adams, are best separated, again, by the eras in which the two movies were made in. Kidder's Lois is based on the Silver Age Lois, and Adam's Lois is based on the modern age Lois. In the Silver Age, Lois Lane is written in a way that would have been, by today's standards, best referred to as gold digging. From 1957 to 1974, DC Comics published an ongoing series titled Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane, of which stories were about Lois's romance with Superman, attempting to prove Clark Kent and Superman were the same, and trying to get Superman to marry her. Also, there was the constantly getting rescued from danger as a damsel in distress because Silver Age took place in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Margot Kidder. Lois is first introduced as a liberated, hard-nosed, witty, and attractive as intended by the filmmakers. I would say that it is a small improvement from her then comic book counterpart from the previous 2 decades, but she still is written with some of those traits. After being rescued by Superman, she gets awestruck by him, and when she gets the note from Superman asking to be interviewed, she waits on him while wearing a nightgown and her pajamas, like a schoolgirl with a crush. What was wrong with casual home clothes, like a t shirt or sweatpants, like a normal person? And the article she writes after interviewing him, I spent the night with Superman. Even by 1970s standards, that is obviously meant to sound like I totally had sex with that guy without actually saying it. The only saving grace I can give it is that Perry White likely chose that title for her article as he is her editor in chief. Later in the movie, Kidder's Lois has a moment with Reeve's Superman. That was probably meant to lead somewhere in the next movie. Alternatively, the modern age Lois introduced in John Byrne's comic was portrayed as a tough as nails reporter who rarely needed rescuing and was depicted as strong, opinionated, yet sensitive. The major change to her character was that Lois did not fall in love with just Superman, although she was attracted to him. One reason was that the revised nature of the Superman Clark relationship. In the Silver Age stories, Superman had been the man who disguised himself as Clark Kent, and in this newly revised concept, it was Clark Kent who lived a life in which his activity as Superman was decided secondary. This is why ultimately Lois's attraction to Superman eventually died down, and spending time with Clark Kent through certain ups and downs caused her to fall in love with him. The two became a couple, and eventually Lois accepted a proposal of marriage. Shortly after, Clark revealed to Lois that he was Superman. Amy Adams' Lois is first presented meeting Clark in a similar way as in John Byrne's The Man of Steel comic, by having her see Clark first using his powers and getting close and personal with him when saving her. In Byrne's comic, she was on board a civilian aircraft that Clark rescued from crashing down from the sky, and as Clark was landing it safely to the ground, Lois charged out to speak to him, and based on Clark's later insight, it was love at first sight. For him, at least. In the movie, they meet on an Arctic expedition to Canada where the US military and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency have located the Kryptonian scout ship. Lois sees a plainclothes Clark walking on the glacier walls in what she was told earlier to be minus 40 degrees Celsius in temperature. She follows him to the scout ship with better winter clothes and her camera, and at the scout ship she disturbs a security robot that attacks her, which leads to Clark coming to her rescue. Adams Lois is this way given a more active role in looking into Clark's background and finding him, than in the comic where she seemingly had moved on with her life since the encounter. This also takes away the cat and mouse game the Silver Age Lois used to play in trying to prove Clark and Superman to be the same person. This was apparently David Goyer's idea, as he saw Lois Lane too smart of a character to be fooled by a pair of glasses, a number 2 big clothes, and combing his hair to the other side of his head. That's right, it's not just the glasses. Besides Goyer respecting Lois's intelligence, This move also kind of jumps into the status quo in Lois and Clark's relationship that it was in the comics at the time, before New 52. From my perspective, the relationship between the two in the movie is more based on them being portrayed as two attractive people. Amy Adams is a stunning woman, and I already said earlier that I wish I was as ripped as Henry Cavill. Naturally, when two attractive people spend enough time together and go through the same ordeals that these two did in the movie, they eventually give into the attraction, consummate, and they'll move forward as a couple from there. When it comes to the overall portrayal of their relationship in both movies, I find Man of Steel's version of it to be healthier and more honest, with Cavill not trying to deceive Adams with a double identity, whereas the relationship between Reeve and Kidder was carried more by their performances with narrative of they are supposed to be together because of comics. Meaning that both relationships are flawed in their own ways and have some room to grow in their following movies, which I will explore further when I move on to those sequels.
That's kryptonite, Superman. I feel strange.
Both the Donner film and Man of Steel portray Superman's powers on Earth as well as his reaction to kryptonite in their own separate ways. In the Donner film, the earliest part where we can see the character use his powers is when portrayed by Jeff East's teenage Clark Kent kicking a football really far away and after that running next to a train with somewhat matching speed. We, the audience, are not shown how East Clark developed into his powers, only that he is comfortable using them, so he has had them for long enough to have learned how to control them. His reaction to kryptonite is introduced later as something resembling a phobia or a similar fear reaction to something. My assumption would be that the kryptonite's effect on Superman works like an on off switch, and if Superman knows what kryptonite does to him, he would know that he is vulnerable and powerless near it, a fate he willingly surrenders into. In Man of Steel, on the other hand, the earliest part of Clark's powers shown manifest are when he is 9 years old and played by Cooper Timberlane. As I previously mentioned, Timberlane's scene at school is where Clark's sensory powers like X-ray vision and super hearing with the heat vision first manifesting, and his mother is called to school to help him control them. 6 years later, when Clark is played by Dylan Sprayberry, as a 13-year-old, he is shown to have gained some control over his sensory powers and developed into having super strength with implied invulnerability. By his 17th year of age, they are only spoken of and not very much used in the tornado scene. I need to point out that the super speed has not been shown to have developed yet, but as Jonathan Kent raises his hand to stop Clark from using his powers to come save him, it is implied that he might have it. As we see later in the movie with Faura Ul fighting the US military, the super speed used by Kryptonians would not be fast enough to be invisible to the naked eye, so Clark would have indeed been seen if he were to use his speed to save Jonathan Kent. While Man of Steel does not have any physical kryptonite in it, there is the effect it has on Clark when he and Lois are taken on Black Zero to meet General Zod. The ship has a Kryptonian atmosphere on it, which Zod's unit breathe when on board. This is why Lois was given a breathing apparatus when she was brought on with Clark. So when Clark, at his full solar power charged powers, is brought on board to breathe the Kryptonian atmosphere, he begins to experience dizziness and loses his consciousness as his powers are depleted from him like from a smartphone battery with too many applications online at the same time. The difference between kryptonite effects in two movies is essentially that in the Donner film, kryptonite is used more as an on-off switch that takes Superman's powers away from him and make him go limp, while in Man of Steel it has more of a physical effect on slowly draining Clark's powers and overall strength. Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition can also be used as an example on how Clark's powers start to go down from 100% to somewhere under 15% in his fight against Ben Affleck's Batman. But again, that is an extended topic to talk about in a future video.
It's history. It's happening, Superman.
My soul, that is what you have taken from me.
At the end of Superman 1978, the challenge Superman is forced to overcome is choosing which one of two hijacked missiles he is supposed to stop from destroying the West Coast or East Coast. He ends up going after the East Coast missile and manages to divert its course into space while only managing to deal with the aftermath of the West Coast missile exploding in the San Andreas Fault. This includes keeping the continental plates from causing more earthquakes, keeping the Golden Gate Bridge from getting more damage, and breaching the Hoover Dam before sealing the fault line. While Superman is busy saving others, Lois's car falls into a crevice from the aftershocks, trapping her as it fills with dirt and debris. Superman is unable to reach her in time and she suffocates. Angered with failing to save her, Superman defies Jor-El's earlier warnings not to manipulate human history and instead flies around the Earth at accelerating speed to make time go backwards several minutes to undo everything that happened during those minutes. This includes the damage caused by the missile and the earthquakes that caused Lois to die. Essentially, Superman managed to save the day by playing God with a Deus Ex Machina power that was not previously shown to exist along the powers he has. Then he goes to have that moment with Lois before going to turn Gene Hackman's Lex Luthor and his henchman Otis to prison authorities instead of the law enforcement so they can have their due process.
I think these two men should be safe here with you now till they can get a fair trial.
By modern standards, this ending comes across like a cop-out with a mandated happy ending for the sake of happy ending. But since this movie came out in the Silver/Bronze Age, I could let it slide as it would have happened in a Superman comic story that came out at the time. However, this goes against Richard Donner's earlier state of having superhero movie done straight rather than in a campy way of having good defeat evil because it has to. I could be wrong in assuming this to have been the reason why Donner was replaced with Richard Lester in the sequel, but I also know that Richard Donner had planned this ending for his cut of Superman 2, with Superman doing the fly around the globe to undo everything that happened and place Zod with his posse back to the Phantom Zone. Alternatively, in Man of Steel, Clark is given a similar gauntlet with two terraforming world engines at the opposite sides of the planet, along with General Zod's military unit. Instead of being forced to handle them alone by himself, Clark is aided by Lois working with the United States military and DARPA in dealing with the other world engine and using the ship that brought Clark to Earth in sending Zod's platoon back to the Phantom Zone. By himself, Clark manages to destroy the world engine on the opposite side of the world and makes it back to help US military finish the job with the other world engine in Metropolis and sends Zod's unit on it back to the Phantom Zone, while making a choice in standing with his adopted home rather than the long-dead civilization that he was never a part of anyway. Zod, however, is the only one left from his unit, and now as a man with nothing left to lose, he swears bloody vengeance on Clark by declaring to take the human race he chose over his own people away from him, one by one. What follows is a battle of two Supermen in what is left of Metropolis after the world engine, and the more experienced military combatant totally dominating the fight against the Green Horn on his first day as the Man of Steel. Something that many of the film's critics decided to overlook when deciding why they wanted to hate this movie. And before anyone gets the idea to write down in the comments, why didn't Clark just lead Zod away from the city? Let me show you this page from 2003's Superman Batman Public Enemies that was cut out of the movie adaptation as an example of what Zod would have done if Clark even tried to suggest that. Also, Zod said, and I quote,
I'm going to make them suffer, Cal. Humans you've adopted. I will take them all from you one by one.
Meaning that Zod's main objective was to kill humans at this point more than fight Clark. Their fight was more way for Zod to do that by causing all the collateral damage we see happening as their fight goes on, and as Clark is inexperienced in combat, he doesn't really register the collateral damage until after the effect. Any complaint such as Superman would notice or Superman would do better is invalid, as this character is not Superman yet. He is Clark Kent wearing the suit for the first time since he got it earlier in the movie. This is why he is reacting more than acting, as he is fighting due to his inexperience and because he is fighting a more superior opponent.
I was bred to be a warrior, Cal. Trained my entire life, master my senses. Where did you train? On a farm?
In the end, their fight leads to a situation similar as in The Prize, where Clark is forced to kill Zod before the general kills any more humans than he already has during their fight. Except, unlike in The Prize, Zod's death by neck snap is quicker and more humane than the slow execution via kryptonite radiation where he and his posse had to beg for mercy before death took them. This was apparently Zack Snyder's idea, similar to what John Byrne had in mind being the justification for Superman's no-killing rule. Just because you know that killing is wrong, that can only get you so far as you're still left with that option. And then you just eventually find yourself questioning why you shouldn't do it. And when the right time comes, the right or the wrong time, but the time nonetheless, you decide to make a once in a lifetime exception. But that is what justifies the rest of the killings that come after it. With the foundation that John Byrne built and Zack Snyder recreated, Superman now has a clear foundation for why he is not going to even consider killing as an option. As we see in the movie, Clark is utterly devastated over what he has been forced to do, meaning that this is the reaction to an experience he would never wish to go through again. I can defend this decision in having Clark kill Zod by comparing it to the Injustice Superman when he killed the Joker. Before the events that led to the Injustice Superman becoming the High Counselor of the regime, he was established in flashbacks to have been like any stereotypical version of Superman who could have been portrayed by Christopher Reeve. A Superman who had not gone through challenges that would have prepared him for a situation like this. As Clark is shown screaming with discomfort after being forced to kill Zod, it comes across as a clear message that he would never wish to go through with it again. And if he was put into a situation where he was forced to kill, Clark would be very hesitant and try to find another way. And I will be talking about this more when I get to Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition. Alternatively, Superman's reaction to Lois's death in the Donner film can be interpreted as a tantrum that Jor-El's words briefly managed to stop him for a while, but ultimately, like in Injustice, Reeve's Superman ignores them and goes forward with using his powers for personal reasons, which can be interpreted as an abuse of power. And as I said before, Richard Donner wanted to use the fly around the world to make the time go backwards and undo the events method at the end of his cut of Superman 2. At least Snyder and Goyer had Clark stand by the consequences of his actions and mistakes so he can learn from them. Then, after talking to Martian Manhunter's human disguise and with his mother, Clark decides to join Daily Planet to have his ear on the ground and use his job as a cover to learn when and where he would be needed as Superman in the future, while also working with Lois as his connection to humanity.
Be a great people, Kal-El. They wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way.
But in time, They will join you in the sun.
Both movies have their controversies, although with Donner they are more for the behind the scenes reasons, and with Snyder they are for the mob mentality where most audience members have just decided to hate the movie because they don't like the guy. Personally, when I think back to the times when I first saw them for the first time, in the Donner films case, I was probably 7 or 9 years old, or maybe even younger, and with Man of Steel, I was 20, turning 21. And even to this day, it is Man of Steel that has stuck with me more than Superman 1948. This is likely due to the fact that I brought up in the beginning with the separation between Clark Kent being the disguise in the Donner film and Clark Kent being the true persona in Man of Steel. This helped me identify with Clark's hero's journey into finding not only his roots, but also his place in the world. Back in 2013, when this movie came out, I was in a transitional period of my life where I was studying for my first degree after high school, and my parents decided to get a divorce in the middle of that, leaving me blindsided on which one I should move in with or if I should start looking for my own apartment. Without a direction where to go, I found myself identifying more with Henry Cavill's Clark as he was also looking for his place, and that is where I managed to connect with this movie. Compared to the Donner Superman movie, when I first saw it in my 7 or 9 years old mind, I maybe remember just noticing the costumes everyone was wearing, and even to as young as I was, I could recognize the wire work for the special effects that they were. It took some time for me to grow older and a little bit wiser to grasp how the story was told on later viewings, but when it comes to remembering good things about the movie, it kind of just falls onto the actors' performances, especially with Gene Hackman.
I've spared no expense to make you feel right at home.
In the end, both of these movies are products of their time. Superman 1978 came out during the twilight years of the Silver Age when we had moved on to the Bronze Age, and Man of Steel came out deep into the modern age when DC Comics was doing the New 52. The New 52's only contribution was getting rid of the red underwear on the outside of the costume and nothing else! The clear difference between Superman 1978 and The Man of Steel, from my point of view, is that the former was a Superman movie and the latter one was a Superman movie, which goes against David Carradine's speech from Kill Bill Volume 2, that most people seem to use as their template in how Superman should be portrayed. I could also make an accurate statement saying that Zack Snyder was not the one who changed Superman into something else from what he was in Richard Donner's film. John Byrne did it, and he did it 27 years before Zack Snyder's movie came out. That is how late it is to complain about the character being different. And at this point, I think it's time to take another couple of weeks off before I would start writing the review for Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition. I'll try having that video come out before Zack Snyder's Justice League comes out on HBO Max. But I might have some smaller videos come out too before, so that my channel stays alive. As we are now at the end of the video, all that's left for me to say is like, comment, share and subscribe, and may your heart be your guiding key.